The wind sighed through the brittle grass of Sage Hollow, Montana, in the crisp fall of 1881, carrying the bitter tang of ash and the sharp bite of pine across a valley scarred by loss. It wove around a crumbling homestead where charred timbers rose like broken ribs from a fire that had stolen nearly all Clara Boone held dear. At 30, she stood in the shadow of her ruined barn, her auburn hair tangled beneath a faded gray bonnet, her brown eyes tracing the blackened scars of a life burned to cinders. Her late father's wool coat hung heavy on her frame, its sleeves too long, patched at the elbows, grounding her against the chill that seeped into her bones. Her hands, rough and calloused from relentless toil, gripped a shovel, digging furrows for wheat in soil as unyielding as stone. Beside her, her sister Tess, 14, freckles dusting her wind-chapped cheeks, hauled rocks in a frayed apron, her breath clouding in the air. Their brother, Nate, 11, tossed pebbles with a stubborn scowl, his patched trousers flapping, his small hands red from the cold. The townsfolk of Sage Hollow shunned them, whispering of curses after the fire took their parents, their cattle, and their hope, leaving only a half-blind mule named Juniper and a handful of scrawny chickens clucking in a rickety coop. Clara's land acres of dust and fading dreams was all that tethered her to this unforgiving place. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and sorrow, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. Clara's shovel struck a stone, the jolt rattling up her arms, a sharp reminder of the land's resistance. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow with a tattered sleeve, and glanced at Tess, who was braiding Nate's unruly curls to keep him still. "Keep moving, Nate," Clara said, her voice steady but threaded with exhaustion. "We'll plant till the light's gone." Nate nodded, his brown eyes mirroring her quiet resolve, and tossed another pebble onto a growing pile. They had no money for seed beyond a single sack of wheat, no help from neighbors who turned away at the sight of Clara's determined stride in Sage Hollow's dusty streets. The fire had done more than devour wood, it had scorched away trust, leaving Clara to bear the weight of her family alone. She'd overheard the gossip at the general store. Clara Boone's cursed, her land's a grave. The words cut deep, but she refused to break. Not while Tess and Nate looked to her for strength. As dusk cloaked the valley, the wind grew sharp, rattling the homestead's splintered shutters like a warning. Clara led Tess and Nate inside, their boots scuffing the warped floorboards of a house stripped bare by hardship. No curtains softened the drafty windows, no rugs warmed the cold planks, just a scarred oak table, a smoky stove that coughed ash, and a single pallet where the siblings huddled for warmth. Clara lit a lone candle, its flicker dancing on the walls, casting shadows that seemed to whisper of her parents' laughter, now silenced. She set out a meager supper, a loaf of stale bread, a jar of watery broth from last week's bones, and a handful of dried apples, their last taste of summer. Tess ate in silence, her fingers tracing a crack in her tin cup, her eyes heavy with unspoken worry. Nate chewed slowly, his usual chatter stilled by hunger, but he managed a small grin when Clara ruffled his hair. "We'll get that field planted." "Tomorrow?" she said, forcing a smile despite the ache in her chest. "It'll grow, you'll see." Tess nodded faintly, but doubt lingered in her gaze, and Nate's grin faded as he stared at his empty plate. After supper, Clara tucked Tess and Nate into their pallet, pulling a patched quilt over their thin frames. Their soft breaths filled the quiet as she sat at the table, unfolding a crumpled newspaper, its edges frayed from her restless touch. By the candle's dim glow, an ad caught her eye. "Men seeking land, not love, answer to women of the frontier. Write to Ironwood Post, Wyoming." Her pulse quickened, a mix of fear and fragile hope. She wasn't chasing romance. Love was a dream buried beneath the ashes of her parents' grave, marked by a simple cross beyond the barn. But she needed hands. To rebuild, to save the land for Tess and Nate's future, to give them a life beyond dust and want. Her fingers brushed the pencil stub, its lead worn to a nub, and she hesitated, memories flooding back. Her father's calloused hands shaping this house, her mother's voice singing over a steaming pot of stew. They believed in this land. And Clara couldn't let it die. She took the pencil, her hand trembling, and scratched out a letter on a scrap of yellowed paper. Widow, no wealth, burned homestead in Montana. 2 young siblings to raise. Offer land for honest labor. No promises but truth and hard work. She sealed it with a drip of wax, the hiss like a sigh, and tucked it into her coat pocket for the next trip to town. The act felt reckless, a spark. Tossed into dry grass, but what choice remained? The candle flickered, nearly spent, as Clara knelt by the cold hearth, the weight of her father's coat pressing against her shoulders. Outside, the wind howled, rattling loose shingles, testing her resolve. Sage Hollow was a brutal land, unforgiving as iron, but it was hers. She'd fight for it, even if it meant trusting a stranger whose past she couldn't know. The letter was a gamble, a faint ember in a world of ash. Would it kindle a future or burn her heart once more? Could a stranger's hands rebuild her shattered land or awaken a warmth Clara thought was lost forever? The Montana dawn crept over Sage Hollow in the fall of 1881, its pale light spilling across the frost-dusted plains, where the charred skeleton of a homestead stood stark against the earth. Clara Boone knelt by a splintered fence post, her auburn hair tucked beneath a faded gray bonnet, her brown eyes scanning the horizon for a stagecoach that might never arrive. Her father's oversized wool coat hung heavy on her shoulders, its patched elbows brushing the dirt as she hammered a nail into the wood, each strike a quiet defiance against the land's decay. Nearby, Tess 14, her freckles vivid in the cold, fed the half-blind mule, Juniper, a handful of brittle hay, her breath clouding in the crisp air. Nate, 11, stacked kindling by the sagging house, his patched trousers dusted with frost, his scowl masking the hope he barely dared to feel. 2 weeks had passed since Clara mailed her letter to Ironwood Post, offering land for labor, and the silence weighed heavier than the shovel she'd wielded in the wheat field. Sage Hollow's townsfolk still shunned them, their whispers of curses trailing Clara like smoke, but she held fast, her heart steeled for Tess and Nate, her only family in a valley of Ashdod as the sun climbed. Painting the valley in soft gold, a faint rumble broke the morning's hush. Clara paused, her hammer still, and squinted down the rutted road, her pulse quickening. A stagecoach emerged from the dust, its wheels creaking, horses snorting clouds of steam. Hope and fear tangled in her chest, sharp as the wind that tugged at her bonnet. The driver pulled the reins, and a man stepped down, tall and lean, his boots scuffed but sturdy, a worn leather satchel slung over his shoulder. Owen Hale, 34, his dark brown hair streaked with gray at the temples, stood under a weathered hat, his hazel eyes steady, a faint scar curving above his left brow like a question unanswered. He scanned the homestead, the blackened barn timbers, the sagging house, the cracked wheat field, and met Clara's gaze. "Clara Boone?" he asked, his voice low, roughened by dust and distance. She rose, brushing dirt from her hands, her brown eyes wary. "I sent the letter." "I answered it," he said, his gaze calm but searching. Holding hers as if reading the weight of her words, Clara led him to the porch. Tess and Nate trailing behind, their boots scuffing the frost-hardened earth. The house groaned as they entered, its bare walls and smoky stove offering no warmth, only the echo of hardship. Clara gestured to the scarred oak table, its surface etched with her father's initials from better days. "Sit," she said, her voice firm but threaded with caution. Owen set his satchel down, his movements deliberate, and removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and secrets, his scar catching the light from a cracked window. "Your letter was plain," he said, folding his hands, his hazel eyes steady. "I like plain. I'm no farmer, but I've built things, fences, bridges, lives that didn't hold." He paused, a flicker of something regret, perhaps crossing his face. "I came for a start, not a soft bed." Clara studied him, her fingers tightening on her coat, memories of her father's broken promises stirring unbidden. "I've got land," she said. "No money, no comfort, just work." "You get a share if you stay," Owen nodded once, sharp as a blade. "Work's enough for now." That afternoon, Owen walked the homestead with Clara, his boots crunching over the brittle grass, his silence heavy but not unkind. Tess and Nate followed at a distance, whispering about the stranger's steady stride, their curiosity outweighing their shyness. Owen surveyed the blackened barn, its timbers jutting like bones, the cracked wheat field struggling to breathe, and the rickety chicken coop where a lone hen clucked defiantly. "Start with the fence," he said, pointing to a sagging line of posts near the corral. "Keeps what's yours safe." Clara nodded, handing him a hammer, her brown eyes searching his face for signs of deceit. They worked side by side, her shovel digging post holes, his nails securing wood, their breaths clouding in the chill. Tess brought water in a dented bucket, her freckled face cautious but softening when Owen thanked her with a nod. Nate tossed stray nails into a tin, his chatter filling the quiet. "You ever see a buffalo, mister?" he asked, eyes bright. Owen's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Once in Dakota. Big as a house, moved like thunder." Nate grinned, and Tess hid a laugh behind her apron, her braids swinging dot by dusk. The fence stood straighter, a small triumph against the land's decay. Clara served supper in the dim house-boiled oats sweetened with a drop of molasses, a handful of dried apples and broth too thin to warm the bones. Owen ate without complaint, his hand steady on the tin spoon, his hazel eyes catching the candle's flicker. Tess watched him, her fingers twisting her braid, while Nate peppered him with tales of buffalo and far-off plains. Clara stayed quiet, her thoughts drifting to her mother's kitchen, once filled with laughter and the scent of fresh bread, now just a memory buried in ash. She studied Owen's scar, wondering what battles wore or otherwise had marked him. After Tess and Nate curled up on their pallet, Clara found Owen by the corral, checking Juniper's tether under a starlit sky, the wind whispering through the valley. "You didn't come for land alone," she said softly, her coat wrapped tight against the cold. "What else?" Owen turned, his hazel eyes glinting in the moonlight. "A place to stop running," he said, his voice low, raw with truth. He walked back to the lean-to he'd claimed as his shelter, leaving Clara standing alone, her heart torn between caution and a spark of trust. The wind stirred the brittle grass, its whisper weaving through Sage Hollow's lonely plains. Clara clutched her father's coat, its weight grounding her against the uncertainty Owen's words had stirred. His hands had begun to mend her land, but what shadows lingered in his past? And what would they mean for the fragile hope she dared to hold? Could Owen's quiet strength rebuild Clara's homestead or unearth secrets that would test her heart's resolve? The Montana sun rose sharp over Sage Hollow in the late fall of 1881, its golden rays piercing the frost that clung to the plains, where the charred bones of a homestead stood defiant against time's neglect. Clara Boone stood by the corral, her auburn hair loose beneath her faded gray bonnet, her brown eyes watching the half-blind mule, Juniper, nibble at sparse grass. Her father's wool coat, patched and heavy, warmed her against the morning chill as she clutched a dented tin cup of bitter coffee, its steam curling like a whispered prayer. A week had passed since Owen Hale arrived, his steady hands mending the sagging fence, his quiet presence stirring hope and doubt in equal measure. Nearby, Tess, 14, her freckled cheeks flushed, swept the porch, while Nate, 11, hauled a bucket of water, his patched trousers muddy from splashing. The townsfolk of Sage Hollow still whispered of curses, their cold stares following Clara at the general store. But the homestead felt different now, less broken, as if Owen's labor had begun to coax life from the ash dot as morning warmed the valley. Clara walked to the wheat field, where Owen was reinforcing a ditch to catch spring runoff. His dark brown hair, streaked with gray, fell across his brow under his weathered hat, his hazel eyes focused as he drove a spade into the earth, the scar above his brow catching the light. His flannel shirt, rolled to the elbows, bore dust and sweat, a testament to his word, "Work's enough." Clara set her cup down and joined him, her shovel biting into the soil, their movements falling into a rhythm, like a dance neither had planned. "This'll hold water come thaw," Owen said, his voice low, rough with effort. Clara nodded, her brown eyes flicking to his face, searching for cracks in his calm. "You've done this before," she said, half question, half statement. Owen paused, leaning on his spade. "Ditches, fences, railroads built 'em all. from Kansas to Dakota. His gaze drifted to the horizon, distant as if chasing a memory. Didn't stay long anywhere. Clara's shovel stilled, her heart tightening. Why not? She asked. He met her eyes, hazel glinting with something raw. Nothing held me, he said, and turned back to work. By noon, Tess brought a jug of water, her braids swinging, her freckled face softening as Owen thanked her with a nod. Nate trailed behind, his arms full of sticks for kindling, his chatter unstoppable. You ever fight wolves, Mr. Hale? He asked, eyes wide. Owen's mouth twitched, a rare half-smile. Chased one off a camp once with a torch and a shout. Nate grinned, clutching his sticks tighter, and Tess rolled her eyes but lingered, watching Owen's steady hands. Clara observed the exchange, a warmth stirring in her chest, unbidden and unsettling. She remembered her father's promises fields. Of wheat, a home for generations broken by fire and fate? Owen's presence felt like a spark, but sparks could burn as easily as they warmed. That afternoon, trouble stirred. Clara and Owen were mending the chicken coop, nailing fresh boards to replace the rotted ones when a shadow fell across the yard. A rider approached, his horse kicking dust, his hat pulled low. It was Jed Carver, a rancher from Sage Hollow, his broad face twisted with disdain. Boone, he barked, dismounting, his boots heavy on the earth. Your land's a blight. Sell it to me, take your brats and go. Clara's grip tightened on her hammer, her brown eyes blazing. It's mine, Carver, always will be. Jed sneered, stepping closer. Cursed land don't grow, you'll starve. Owen straightened, his spade in hand, his hazel eyes cold. She said no, he said, voice low but sharp as a blade. Yet. Gaze flicked to Owen, sizing him up, then back to Clara. You'll beg me yet. He spat and rode off, dust trailing like a threat. Tess and Nate, watching from the porch, clung to each other, their faces pale. Clara's hands shook as she drove another nail, her anger masking fear. Owen resumed work, his silence steadying her, but his presence raised questions she couldn't shake. That evening she served supper-boiled oats with a drizzle of molasses. Dried apples and a thin broth warmed over the smoky stove. Owen ate. Quietly, his hazel eyes catching the candle's glow, while Nate recounted the Wolf story to Tess, who laughed despite herself. After the children slept, Clara found Owen by the corral, oiling Juniper's harness under the starlit sky, the wind whispering through the valley. You didn't have to stand up to Carver, she said, her coat wrapped tight. Owen glanced up, his scars stark in the moonlight. Didn't have to, he said, wanted to. Clara's breath caught, her heart torn between gratitude and caution. You're not staying long, are you? She asked, voice soft. Owen's hazel eyes met hers, raw and unguarded. Haven't decided, he said, and turned back to the harness. The wind stirred the brittle grass, its sigh weaving through Sage Hollow's lonely plains. Clara stood by the corral, her father's coat grounding her against the weight of Owen's words. His hands were mending her land, but his heart remained a mystery, a shadow cast by a past he wouldn't share. Could she trust a man who might leave as quietly as he'd come? Would Owen's strength anchor Clara's hope or vanish like dust in the Montana wind? The Montana dusk settled over Sage Hollow in the waning fall of 1881, its violet light softening the harsh edges of a homestead still scarred by fire. Clara Boone stood by the wheat field, her auburn hair spilling from her faded gray bonnet, her brown eyes tracing the fragile green shoots pushing through the cracked earth. Her father's wool coat, patched and heavy, shielded her from the evening chill as she clutched a tattered journal, its pages filled with her mother's sketches of wildflowers, remnants of a life before ash. Owen Hale's arrival 3 weeks ago had changed the rhythm of Sage Hollow. The fence stood firm, the chicken coop no longer creaked, and hope flickered in Tess and Nate's laughter. Yet Clara's heart remained guarded, wary of the stranger, whose hazel eyes held secrets as deep as the valley's shadows. Tess, 14, her freckled cheeks glowing, fed Juniper, the half-blind mule, while Nate, 11, whittled a stick on the porch, his patched trousers muddy from play. The townsfolk's whispers of curses lingered, but the homestead felt alive, as if Owen's calloused hands were coaxing its heart to beat again. As twilight deepened, Clara joined Owen at the barn's ruins where he was salvaging charred timbers for a new frame. His dark brown hair, gray-streaked, clung to his brow under his weathered hat, his hazel eyes focused as he pried a board free, the scar above his brow stark in the fading light. His flannel shirt, rolled to the elbows, bore the dust of labor, his movements steady, deliberate. Clara handed him a nail, her fingers brushing his, a fleeting spark that made her breath catch. "This'll hold a roof by spring," Owen said, his voice rough but warm. Clara nodded, her brown eyes searching his face. "You talk like you're staying," she said, her tone cautious. Owen paused, his hammer still, and met her gaze, hazel eyes glinting with something unspoken. "Maybe. I am," he said, soft as the wind stirring the brittle grass. Clara's heart thudded, torn between trust and the memory of promises broken by fire and fate. By evening the air grew sharp, the stars piercing the velvet sky. Clara and Owen worked on, their silence filled by the rhythmic tap of hammer on wood, Tess and Nate's laughter drifting from the house. Tess brought a lantern, its golden glow casting shadows, her braids swinging as she set it down. "Supper's ready," she said, her freckled face bright. Sneaking a glance at Owen, Nate trailed behind, clutching his whittled stick, shaped like a crude horse. "Look, Mr. Hale," he crowed, holding it up. Owen's mouth twitched, a rare smile. "Fine work, Nate. Keep at it." Nate beamed, and Tess tugged his sleeve, leading him back inside. Clara watched them go, a warmth blooming in her chest, unbidden and fragile, like the wheat shoots she'd planted, but sage hollows. Peace was fleeting. As Clara and Owen finished nailing a beam, hoofbeats thundered in the distance, a cloud of dust rising under the moonlight. 3 riders approached, their silhouettes menacing against the plains. Jed Carver, the rancher who demanded Clara's land, led them, his broad face twisted with malice. Flanked by 2 hands, their rifles glinting. "Boone!" Jed barked, reining his horse. "Last chance, sell or regret it." Clara's grip tightened on her hammer, her brown eyes blazing like embers. "Get off my land, Carver," she said, voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. Jed sneered, his gaze flicking to Owen. "Got yourself a drifter, huh? Won't save you." Owen stepped forward, his spade in hand, his hazel eyes cold as steel. "She told you to leave," he said, low and lethal. Yet's men shifted, hands on their rifles, but Owen didn't flinch, his stance unyielding. Clara's heart pounded, memories of the fire flashing her father's shouts, her mother's screams, the blaze that stole them. She wouldn't lose this land, not to Yet's greed. "You want to fight, Carver?" she said, stepping beside Owen, hammer raised. "You'll get one." Yet's sneer faltered, his eyes narrowing at her defiance, then at Owen's quiet strength. "You'll crawl to me yet," he spat, yanking his reins. The riders wheeled and galloped off, dust swirling like a warning. Clara's hands shook as she lowered her hammer, her breath ragged. Owen touched her arm, brief but steadying. "You all right?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded, swallowing hard, her brown eyes meeting his. "Thanks to you," she said, the words heavy with gratitude and something deeper. Unspoken. Inside, Clara served supper-boiled oats with molasses, dried apples, and a thin broth warmed over the smoky stove. The lantern cast a warm glow, softening the bare walls. Owen ate quietly, his hazel eyes catching the light, while Tess recounted Nate's whittling, her laughter easing the tension. "Nate, emboldened, asked Owen about Dakota wolves again, earning a chuckle. Clara watched, her journal resting on her lap, her mother's wildflower sketches a reminder of what she fought for. After Tess and Nate slept, Clara found Owen by the corral, oiling Juniper's harness under the starlit sky, the wind whispering through the plains. "You didn't run from Carver's men," she said, her coat wrapped tight. Owen glanced up, his scar stark in the moonlight. "Had no reason to," he said. "This land's worth fighting for." Clara's breath caught, her heart wrestling. "With trust. And you?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "What are you fighting for?" Owen's hazel eyes held hers, raw and unguarded. "Something real," he said, and turned back to the harness. The wind sighed through Sage Hollow's lonely valley, its whisper weaving around Clara's heart. Owen's hands were rebuilding her land, his courage shielding her family, but his past remained a shadow, as elusive as the stars above. Could she dare to believe in a man whose truth was still half hidden? Would Owen's strength forge a future with Clara or unravel under the weight of secrets yet to be told? The Montana winter crept into Sage Hollow in the early months of 1882, its icy breath frosting the plains, where the Homestead scars stood softened under a thin blanket of snow. Clara Boone knelt by the hearth, her auburn hair loose beneath a knitted shawl, her brown eyes reflecting the fire's glow as she stirred a pot of barley soup, its steam curling like a fragile hope. Her father's wool coat hung by the door, patched but warm, a silent reminder of the land she fought to keep. Owen Hale's hands had transformed Sage Hollow over weeks. The barn's new frame rose sturdy. The wheat field's ditches held promise, and the chicken coop hummed with life. Yet Jed Carver's threat lingered, his rider's hoofbeats echoing in Clara's dreams, mingling with memories of the fire that stole her parents. Tess, 14, her freckled cheeks flushed, mended a quilt by the lantern, while Nate, 11, carved a wooden bird on the floor, his patched trousers dusted with shavings. Owen's quiet strength had kindled hope in their eyes, but Clara's heart wrestled with trust, haunted by the scar above his brow and the past he held close. As dawn broke, pale and brittle, Clara stepped outside, her boots crunching snow, to find Owen splitting wood by the corral. His dark brown hair, gray-streaked, clung to his brow under his weathered hat, his hazel eyes focused, breath clouding in the cold. His flannel shirt, rolled to the elbows, bore frost and splinters, his scar stark against his weathered face. "Cold settling in," he said, his voice rough but steady, driving the axe into a log. Clara nodded, her brown eyes tracing his hands, calloused yet precise. "We'll need more wood," she said, picking up a smaller axe to join him. Their swings fell in rhythm, the crack of wood echoing across the plains. Tess brought a tin mug of weak coffee, her braids swinging, her freckled face softening as Owen thanked her with a nod. Nate trailed behind, his wooden bird clutched tight, his chatter unstoppable. "You ever see snow this deep, Mr. Hale?" he asked, eyes bright. Owen's mouth twitched a half-smile. "In Dakota it buried fences. Had to dig out the horses." Nate grinned, and Tess hid a laugh, her quilt forgotten. By noon, the air grew heavy. Clouds massing over Sage Hollow, their shadows darkening the homestead. Clara and Owen moved to the barn, nailing planks to the frame, their breath visible in the chill. Clara's hammer struck true, but her thoughts drifted to Owen's words by the corral months ago, a place to stop running. What chased him? She glanced at his scar, her brown eyes searching. "You built railroads," she said, her voice soft but probing. "Why'd you leave?" Owen paused, his hammer still, his hazel eyes distant. "Built for men who broke promises," he said, low and raw. "Took my wages, my trust, left me with nothing but this." He touched his scar, a fleeting gesture, then resumed work. Clara's heart tightened, sensing a wound deeper than flesh, but she didn't press. Her own scars too raw to share. That afternoon, danger struck like a spark in dry grass. Clara was feeding Juniper in the corral when a flicker of orange caught her eye, smoke rising from the wheat field. Her stomach dropped, memories of the fire roaring, her parents' screams, the blaze that devoured them. "Fire!" she shouted, dropping the feed bucket. Owen sprinted from the barn, Tess and Nate racing behind, their faces pale. Flames licked the field's edge where dry grass met the ditches, smoke curling thick and acrid. "Carver!" Clara hissed, her brown eyes blazing, knowing Yet's hand was behind this. Owen grabbed a shovel, his hazel eyes fierce. "Dig a break!" he barked, slashing at the grass to starve the fire. Clara seized a rake, her hand steady despite her pounding heart, scraping earth beside him. Tess and Nate hauled buckets from the creek, splashing water, their breaths ragged. The flames hissed, faltering, but smoke stung Clara's eyes, her fear threatening to choke her. Owen's voice cut through the haze. "Stay with me, Clara!" he shouted, his spade carving a trench, his scar stark against his soot-streaked face. She nodded, raking faster, their efforts merging as snow melted under the heat. Tess's bucket sloshed, soaking Nate, who coughed but kept running. The fire shrank, its roar fading to a crackle, the field's green shoots spared. Clara sank. To her knees, her rake falling, her breath shuddering. Owen knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "It's out," he said, his hazel eyes locked on hers, fierce with relief. Tess and Nate collapsed nearby, their freckled faces smudged, clutching each other. Clara's brown eyes met Owen's, gratitude and something deeper swirling within. Her, like embers catching kindling that evening, Clara served supper barley soup, thickened with oats, dried apples, and a loaf of coarse bread baked over the smoky stove. The lantern cast a golden glow, softening the bare walls, but tension lingered. Tess mended her quilt, her fingers trembling, while Nate carved his bird, his chatter subdued. Owen ate quietly, his hazel eyes catching the light, his silence a shield. Clara's journal lay open, her mother's wildflower sketches a balm for her shaken heart. "Carver won't stop," she said, her voice low, breaking the quiet. Owen's spoon paused, his gaze steady. "He'll try again," he said, "but I'm here." Clara's breath caught, her brown eyes searching his, torn between fear and trust. After the children slept, she found Owen by the corral, checking Juniper's blanket under the starlit sky, snow dusting his hat. "You could have run today," she said, her shawl tight. Owen turned, his scar glinting. "Didn't want to," he said, his voice raw. "This place, it's more than land." Clara's heart stirred, but his past remained a shadow. Unspoken, the wind whispered through Sage Hollow's snow-dusted plains, its sigh weaving around Clara's heart. Owen's courage had saved her land, his presence warming her home, but what truths hid behind his scars, and what would they cost her fragile hope? Could Owen's steadfast heart shield Clara's family, or would his past ignite a fire they couldn't outrun? The Montana spring of 1882 stirred Sage Hollow with a fragile warmth, its gentle breeze coaxing green blades through the snow-dusted plains, where a homestead's scars began to heal under new timber and hope. Clara Boone stood by the corral, her auburn hair braided loosely beneath a knitted shawl, her brown eyes watching the half-blind mule, Juniper, graze beside a new calf, its soft bleats mingling with the valley's quiet. Her father's wool coat hung inside, replaced by a lighter jacket, but its weight lingered in her heart, a reminder of the land she'd fought to save. Owen Hale's hands had reshaped Sage Hollow over months. The barn stood tall, its roof tight against the elements. The wheat field promised a modest harvest, and the chicken coop bustled with new hens. Yet Jed Carver's shadow loomed, his arson attempt still burning in Clara's memory, a warning of greed that wouldn't rest. Tess, 14, her freckled cheeks bright, hung laundry on a line, while Nate, 11, polished a wooden bird by the porch, his patched trousers grass-stained from play. Owen's quiet strength had woven into their lives, but Clara's heart teetered, torn between trust and the fear of secrets hidden behind his hazel eyes. As dawn spilled gold across the plains, Clara joined Owen at the barn where he was carving. A door latch, his dark brown hair streaked with gray, his weathered hat pushed back. His hazel eyes focused, the scar above his brow softened by morning light, his flannel shirt dusted with sawdust. "This'll keep the wind out," he said, his voice rough but warm, testing the latch. Clara handed him a sanded plank, her brown eyes lingering on his hands, steady and scarred like her own. "You've built more than you promised," she sighed, her tone soft but probing. Owen paused, his chisel still, and met her gaze, hazel eyes glinting with something raw. "Promises don't mean much where I'm from," he said. "But this place, it's different." Clara's heart fluttered, memories of her parents' broken dreams fading against Owen's quiet resolve, but his past remained a locked door. By noon, Tess brought a jug of creek water, her braids swinging, her freckled face glowing as Owen thanked her with a nod. Nate trailed behind, his wooden bird now painted with berry juice, its wings vivid red. "Look, Mr. Hale," he crowed, holding it up. Owen's mouth curved, a rare smile. A fine flyer Nate might soar yet? Nate beamed, and Tess laughed. Her laundry basket forgotten. Clara watched, a warmth blooming in her chest, fragile as the wildflowers in her mother's journal. She remembered her mother's voice, singing over a pot of stew, and her father's laughter, now silenced by ash. Owen's presence felt like a melody she hadn't heard in years, but melodies could falter, and she feared the silence that might follow. That afternoon, the valley's peace shattered. Clara and Owen were planting apple saplings near the corral, their hands pressing soil around delicate roots, when hoofbeats thundered across the plains. Jed Carver rode in, alone, his horse lathered, his broad face twisted with fury, a revolver glinting at his hip. "Boone!" he roared, dismounting, his boots kicking dust. "Your drifter's a liar?" Clara froze, her trowel falling, her brown eyes wide. Owen straightened, his shovel in hand, his hazel eyes cold as flint. "Speak plain, Carver," he said, voice lethal. Jed thrust a crumpled letter at Clara, its wax seal broken. "Found this at the post your man's wanted in Kansas. Stole from a railroad, left men broke?" Clara's hands shook as she read. Owen Hale, alias Hale, fugitive, reward $200. Her heart plummeted, the name ablaze against her trust. "Owen?" she whispered, her brown eyes searching his, pleading for denial. Owen's face tightened, his scar stark, his hazel eyes raw with pain. "It's not what it looks," he said, low and urgent. "I took nothing. They framed me men I built. For men like him," he nodded at Jed, whose sneer widened. "Run, Harrow, or I'll drag you to Kansas myself," Jed taunted, hand on his revolver. Clara's mind reeled, memories of the fire, her parents' screams, the blaze mixing with betrayal's sting. Tess and Nate, watching from the porch, clung to each other, their faces pale. "Is it true?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. Owen stepped closer, his shovel falling, his hazel eyes locked on hers. "I ran from lies, Clara, not guilt. I stayed here for truth for you." His words pierced her, raw and steady, but doubt coiled tight. Jed laughed, cold and cruel. "He'll bolt, Boone. Sell me the land, save your brats." Clara's brown eyes blazed, her fear turning to fire. "Get off my land, Carver," she said, voice steady, stepping between Owen and Jed. "You don't scare me." Yet's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Owen moved, swift and silent, his fist slamming into Yet's jaw. Jed staggered, blood trickling, and scrambled to his horse, fleeing with a curse. Clara's breath shuddered, her hands clenched, her brown eyes locked on Owen. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, tears brimming. Owen's hazel eyes softened, his voice raw. "Didn't want to lose this," he said, glancing at the homestead, at Tess and Nate, at her. He walked to the barn, leaving Clara trembling in the dust. That evening, Clara served supper barley soup, coarse bread, and dried apples. The meal warmed over the smoky stove. The lantern cast a golden glow, but silence hung heavy. Tess mended her quilt, her fingers unsteady, while Nate clutched his wooden bird, his chatter gone. Clara's journal lay closed, her mother's wildflowers a distant comfort. Owen ate quietly, his hazel eyes shadowed, his silence a weight. "You staying, Mr. Hale?" Nate asked, voice small. Owen's gaze met Clara's, raw and unguarded. "If she have me," he said, soft as a prayer. Clara's heart ached, torn between betrayal and the man who'd saved her land. After the children slept, she found Owen by the corral, carving a sapling stake under the starlit sky, snow dusting his hat. "I need the truth," she said, her shawl tight. Owen stood, his scar glinting. "I'm no thief, Clara. I built tracks. Lost everything to greed. I came here to start clean." His hazel eyes held hers, pleading. "I'm not running." The wind sighed through Sage Hollow's snow-dusted plains, its whisper weaving around Clara's heart. Owen's truth had shaken her, but his hands had built her home, his heart shielding her family. Could she trust a man whose past bore a different name, or would his shadows consume the hope they'd sown? Would Clara's heart embrace Owen's truth, or would Sage Hollow's scars prove too deep to heal? The Montana summer of 1882 bloomed over Sage Hollow. its golden light bathing the plains in a warmth that softened the homestead's once jagged scars, now healed beneath new timber and thriving fields. Clara Boone stood by a row of young apple trees, their leaves dancing in the breeze, her auburn hair loose beneath a woven straw hat, her brown eyes radiant with a peace she'd thought lost forever. Her father's wool coat hung inside the house, replaced by a light cotton dress, its hem dusted with earth from tending the land she'd fought to keep. Owen Hale's hands had transformed Sage Hollow over months. The barn stood proud, its red roof gleaming under the sun. The wheat field rippled with golden stalks heavy with grain, and the corral hummed with Juniper, the half-blind mule, her calf, and a bustling flock of hens. Jed Carver's threats had faded after Owen's defiance, his greed no match for the homestead's resilient heart. Tess, 14, her freckled cheeks aglow, wove a daisy crown by the creek, her laughter mingling with the water's murmur, while Nate, 11, chased a copper-furred puppy named Rusty, his patched trousers grass-stained, his joy echoing across the valley. Owen's truth has passed as Owen Harrow, framed for theft, had tested Clara's trust, but his steadfast heart had woven a love as enduring as the roots they'd planted together. As dawn spilled hues of rose and gold across the plains, Clara walked to the barn where Owen was hitching Juniper to a cart for market day, his dark brown hair streaked with gray, his weathered hat tilted back. His hazel eyes sparkled with quiet purpose, the scar above his brow softened by the morning light, his flannel shirt patched but clean, carrying the scent of hay and earth. "Wheat'll fetch a good price today," he said, his voice rough but tender, tightening a strap with steady hands. Clara smiled, her brown eyes meeting his, a warmth passing between them like sunlight through leaves. "You've given us more than a harvest," she said, her fingers brushing his arm, a touch that spoke of trust forged through fire and truth. Owen's mouth curved into a rare smile, his hazel eyes glinting with a promise unspoken, and he nodded, his hand lingering over hers for a moment longer than needed. By mid-morning, Tess and Nate joined them, loading the cart with sacks of wheat, baskets of eggs, and a jar of Clara's apple preserves, their laughter filling the air. Tess's daisy crown tilted as she teased Nate about Rusty, who yipped at the hens, scattering feathers. "He'll never catch 'em," she giggled, dodging Nate's playful swipe. Owen chuckled, lifting a sack with ease, his hazel eyes catching Clara's, a shared joy blooming like the wildflowers in her mother's journal. They rode to Sage Hollow's market, the cart creaking under its load, Juniper's hooves steady on the rutted road. The townsfolk, once cold with whispers of curses, now greeted Clara with nods of respect, their murmurs softened by the homestead's revival. A merchant weighed their wheat, his scales tipping generously, and handed Clara a small pouch of coins. She clutched it, her heart swelling not for wealth, but for the future it promised, a home for Tess and Nate, a life rooted in love. That evening, the homestead glowed under a starlit sky, lanterns strung along the new porch, casting a golden warmth across the valley. Clara served a feast-roasted chicken stuffed with sage, fresh bread slathered with butter, apple preserves glistening in a bowl, and a pitcher of cider pressed from last fall's fruit. The table, once scarred and bare, now bore her mother's journal, open to a sketch of daisies, a legacy reborn. Tess wore her daisy crown, her quilt draped over her chair, her freckled face beaming as she recounted market tailies. Nate fed Rusty scraps under the table, his wooden bird perched proudly beside his plate, its red wings vivid in the lantern's glow. Owen sat beside Clara, his flannel shirt open at the collar, his hazel eyes reflecting the light, a quiet strength. "Anchoring the room?" "To Sage Hollow," he toasted, raising a tin cup of cider, his voice steady with pride. "To home." Clara's brown eyes shimmered, her hand finding his beneath the table, their fingers entwining like roots in rich soil. "To us," she added, her voice soft but sure, a vow woven into the moment. As the stars burned bright, Clara and Owen stepped onto the porch, Tess and Nate asleep inside, Rusty curled by the hearth, his snores a soft rhythm. The wind whispered through the plains, gentle as a lullaby, carrying the scent of apple blossoms and earth. Owen leaned against the railing, his hazel eyes tracing the valley, his scar a faint line in the moonlight. "I was running when I came here," he said, his voice low, raw with truth. "Thought I'd never stop. Then I found you." Clara's heart swelled, her brown eyes locked on his, seeing not a fugitive but a man who'd chosen her, chosen. "This land, I was afraid to trust," she admitted, her fingers brushing his scar, a gesture of acceptance. "You showed me it's worth the risk." Owen drew her close, his arms steady, his breath warm against her hair. Under the Montana sky, they vowed to build a life together, not with grand words, but with quiet promises, sealed with a kiss as enduring as the stars above. The next morning, by the creek's edge, Clara and Owen exchanged simple vows. Tess, scattering daisy petals, Nate holding Rusty's leash, his grin wide as the valley. The townsfolk gathered, their faces softened, bearing gifts of seed and cloth, a community reborn. Sage Hollow's plains stretched before them, no longer a place of ash but a home forged in love. Its future as bright as the summer sun. Educational note: in the 1880s, women like Clara shaped the American West, turning hardship into hope with resilience and community. Their courage, rooted in family and trust, built homesteads that endure in Montana's history, reminding us that love can reclaim even the dustiest dreams.